I learned several years ago, purely by accident, which is the normal way one tends to learn things about stuff like worm hatches, which is what we're dealing with here on our third installment, that later in the evening, everything seems to stop or slow down, and you still see an occasional swirl at the surface. But there's no reason why the fish should stop hitting the flies that have been infected before. But they seem to do that. Sometimes it gets cooler, and you think the spawn is shut off, and in some measure it does. But one thing that I have found is that there are worms that start before the other worms and finish before the other worms. It's a continuum, and they're all present at some point beyond the starting point of the worm hatch. They're all present in the water column at the same time. It seems that at some point later in the spawn, the worms seem to be dying off in enough numbers to attract the attention of the stripers and whatever else is feeding on them, and they seem to change. Their bodies get more bleached out, they're pinker, they start to change shape a little bit, they become more visibly segmented, the more accentuated, and you don't really see that unless you go back early in the morning, the next day. So what I've done is I've taken a body pin that's produced by a company called JsonSweden, which is essentially just a curved piece of wire with something to hold it in your vise, and a little thread holder, which I won't be using. You can make one of these yourself with a curved needle. Just blunt the tip, otherwise you'll find yourself creating some real problems. You start this technique by wrapping your tying thread out near the outer end of the body pin. These were originally designed to create bodies for mayflies and nymphs and stuff like that. And what I've done is adapt the technique to making worm flies. And this is a perfectly good imitation of the post-spawn type of worm. You cut a strip of fairly thin foam, about 1/8 of an inch wide or so. Perfection isn't required. And fold this piece of foam in half and pull it up snugly against the back edge of the pin and make a couple of turns of thread. Creates a segment, a body segment. If you were making a mayfly, it would be a tail first, then that. Then you pull the thread underneath and wrap it a couple of times around the pin and pull that gently back against the stuff already tied down. Now the thread is on the inside of the foam, and you can make another turn. And going from segment 1 to segment 2, there's no thread on the outside, nothing to snag or catch, and each segment appears independent of the next. So you can just go along and repeat this about 10 times or so, which we'll do without a whole lot of discussion, but try to make them fairly uniform. The worms probably are very uniform. The fish probably don't care. But this aesthetic is something you do for yourself. The thread, by the way, is fine monofilament, which I use quite a lot, particularly for saltwater flies. Mainly because I can make it disappear. And once you get the hang of this, you can do that fairly quickly. It doesn't take very long at all to create a very nice looking segmented body. Let's see, 3, 6, 7, 8. We'll make a 9th one and call it a day. And I still have a little bit of the foam strip left, and we're going to leave that there for now. But we are going to tie off on that last segment. And then you can slide the whole thing right off the pin. And there we have the worm's body all tied with a little bit of material to tie it to the hook, which is not yet in the vise. So we take body pin out, and you might want to get a good look at it there. You can see how it's held in. And place your hook in the vise, and you can then take this body with its little wings of material attached, take a few turns around the hook shank and slide that thread back to point between the point of the hook and the back of the barb, and pull the body right down. And at that same segment point, take 2 or 3 wraps and then move in front and take a few more wraps. Now you have the body attached to the hook. Make sure it's far enough back because it's adjustable at this point. And then with the thread in front, just like when you were making segments on the body pin, continue exactly the same technique on the hook shank. Until you're up near the eye. Then you can cut away the excess material. Make sure that the foam is wrapped down nice and tightly, so you're crushing it down a bit. Then any soft, creamy colored fur will do for the next step. This is a piece of opossum that I got from a furrier who was about to throw it away. And it had been bleached, but still has a little bit of a creamy tone to it. I'm going to pull the darker guard hairs right out from the tip, and then holding the tips of this soft, creamy stuff, pull whatever underfur I can out of there. Because you don't want this too fluffy. Place this on the hook shank, and you can tie this in either conventionally facing back, or you can tie it in facing forward over the eye. But the idea is you want to surround the hook shank, which you can do by wiggling it a bit here and there, and then pull it back either with a soda straw or with your fingers. This is small enough to easily do with your fingers. and tie it down. In this case, I didn't quite surround the hook shank, so we'll fix it. Another tiny bit of fur. And we'll get the spot. This didn't have any. One thing I noticed when I first saw this phenomenon was looking into the water next to the boat in the dark. I saw flashes of light. Made no sense. They were down a little ways below the surface, and I kind of ignored them. Even after I developed this fly pattern, I found it didn't work all that well. But finally, I said, well, maybe there's something to it. So I went out and I bought some glow-in-the-dark flash material. There are 3 or 4 companies making this stuff, and you can find it in any decent catalog. But it's with the flashes. What I do is take 2 strands, and I fold them so that I get 4 pieces or so. If it turns out to be 5 or 6, it's not a disaster and nobody will care. The fish don't count these, so it's never been a big problem. My biggest problem is folding them, obviously. But if you place these under a bright light, you will find that they do indeed store energy and they glow in the dark. And that's exactly what we want them to do. So I'm going to cut them all off so that they're about the same length. And I'm going to tie them in, spread around the shank of the hook a bit, at least a couple on each side if I can. A few turns to lock them in place. And then finish the head of the fly. So I have a wormy looking little body, a little bit of change here. That's in homage to what I saw after a night of worm fishing, when I actually did manage to get up at 5 o'clock the next morning and go out on the water, and started looking downstream as the current flowed the night before from where we had fished for the worm hatch. What we saw was a bunch of things that looked sort of like this all over the bottom, and there were swirls here and there of obviously larger fish eating them. A little bit of head cement to finish that head off and make sure it stays put. But the bottom was literally covered with these things. The stripers weren't eating them, the bait fish were. And the stripers were in there eating the bait fish at pretty much first light the next day. I don't manage to do that very often. Yeah, it would appear that I missed a spot over here. Let's fix that. It'll teach me not to pay attention. Just to let you know that at pretty much any stage along the way, you can make mistakes and you can repair them. And it's never a problem. But after we retrieved a bunch of these from the water to see what they looked like, I adapted this. And that's where this fuzz came from, really. Didn't see it earlier on. But it does appear to help the results. That the fly produces when you fish it. I've had my best fishing with this design pretty much dead drift. Don't move it around much at all. Let the current toss it where it's going to. And it does catch fish. First effort, I was out with 2 friends in my boat. The first night we tried this, and things slowed down. My friends kept fishing the same patterns that we'd been using, and I caught 7 fish. They caught 2. So that told me that something was right with this. And it's succeeded in doing the same pretty much ever since.